And welcome to another episode of Gossip Finance, where I'm your host, Alacius
And
Inger.
I'm Duncan Sandlin. How's everybody today? How are you, Lacey? You're
I'm
mid-sip.
excellent. I've got a tall cup of coffee,
There you go.
hot coffee in the sweltering New York heat right now.
There you go.
But,
Yeah.
you got to caffeinate the way you got to caffeinate in the morning. And
Uh,
we're shooting in the morning today.
it's perfect here in Oregon, man. It's good weather. 75, sunny, not too hot, nice little breeze. So anyway, for today we got a bunch of stuff. We're going to talk a little bit about home prices and what's going on with that, consumer sentiment, and then kind of the risk to business that Trump poses right now, and why a lot of business owners and corporations are concerned that he might win the election. Also, we'll talk about Project 2025, what's going on with that. Louisiana passed a bill to put the Ten Commandments in schools. We'll discuss that a little bit. That's kind of crazy. And then we'll talk about the upcoming debate and the mental state of Trump and Biden to as much as we can. So all that and more. It should be fun. But we do want to always start now with our new format. We're starting with finance. So I want to talk about this. So home prices have been outpacing pay for a long time, and it's still going on. And I just wanted to jump into this article from NPR here, where home prices have far outpaced paychecks. See what it looks like where you live. You can go on to this. This is actually great. And you can look at locations, and you can just put it into the table. But just in the United States, and they're just looking at the change since 1990, this is 3.1 is times your income, annual income. So in the 90s, it was common that you could get a house that was 2 or 3 times your income. Right? Today, it's more like 5 to 6 times. And so they have it there about where it's 4.9. So homes have gotten to a point where they've been ridiculously expensive. And part of the reason for that is, especially COVID kind of jacked that up. So therefore, millions of Americans are already shut out of buying a home, and the cost of buying a home continues to rise. In the past decades, it was common to find a house that cost roughly 3 times a buyer's annual income, but that ratio has skewed sharply since the COVID-19 pandemic, with home prices up a whopping 47% since early 2020. So take whatever your home was and times it by half, and then add that on. I mean, that's a lot. So home price sales last year were about 5 times the median household income, according to tabulations from a newly released report by the Harvard Joint Center for Housing Studies. So the double whammy of high prices here and high mortgage rates has left homeownership out of reach for all but the most advantaged households. So that's the other thing, is the prices have gone up. And part of the reason is because the market's just been kind of overly hot, overly priced the way it's been set up, especially since COVID. And people moved a lot during COVID. Now it's always kind of been a little bit like this, where it's now cost prohibitive to sell a house to a middle income or lower middle income person. So a lot of these realtors, instead of doing that, they just focus on, well, we'll just make high priced houses because we can sell those to that smaller group of rich people. And for the the middle and lower middle income people, we'll just make apartments. And this is kind of a big deal from a financial perspective, because what really built the wealth in this country to the middle class was home ownership. That's why you see, Black and Hispanic people, especially, cut out of that, because they weren't, they had redlining, they weren't allowed to buy homes.
Right. Denied access to housing, or provided alternative housing options that did
Right.
not include ownership.
Right.
Yeah.
So I kind of wanted to talk about this for a second. So it's one of those things where, maybe you are opposed to owning property, and that's fine. The benefits of it are this. I mean, with rents, if you pay that money every month, it's gone. Right? As well with home ownership, some of that money that you pay every month towards the mortgage goes to the interest payment to the bank, and that money's gone. But a portion of it goes to the principal. And the longer you own the home, the more of that money goes to the principal, just the way interest works. What ends up happening is that's paying down what you owe on the house, right? And then the value of the house increases over time, generally. Real estate does, almost, not always, but almost always. So you've built up equity in the house. So ideally, when you're selling the house, now you've got the proceeds, right? So once you pay off what you owe left on the loan, everything else from the sale is yours to pocket.
You know, Duncan, this is kind of, it's like, I feel like this feels like a more abstract idea for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's almost like when you make the monthly mortgage payment, that amount that is going to the principal that's paying down your loan,
Right.
you could almost look at it as an amount you are putting into a magical little savings account.
Yes.
And then as your home increases in value, you could look at it as almost like the interest you're earning on that amount in that little magical savings account. If it helps
Absolutely.
to sort of put it in your mind that way, that's kind of what's happening with home ownership.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the idea of equity and how my home builds wealth for me, I think it's such an abstract idea that it's worth kind of like distilling it down to something that feels a little more tangible.
Right. And it's the
And so
whole.
when I picture it like a savings account and then the interest that comes into it, when I can kind of compare it to that, it sort of helps me to like
Right.
bring it into something more tangible.
Right. And it's like investing where it's hard to imagine what we're doing is we're building up a portfolio for 10, 20, 30 years. And it's hard for people to picture that far into the future. A house is the same thing under the added level of you don't really see that growing in an account. It's really the equity on the house. So it's kind of like you said, it's a little bit more. It feels like it's more removed, even though it's not, because you physically own the house. Right.
Right.
So
It's also worth adding though, what we're talking about, when you rent a place, your monthly payment, that money is just gone, and that's not the same situation with a mortgage.
no.
I feel that I have to put it in there because with the types of clients that I work with in my coaching business, and they're in all sorts of spaces, but many are don't own homes yet, but are close to that spot, and that's kind of where they're trying to
Right.
get a handle on everything else. One of the things that I always feel like we need to bring to the table in discussion, though, is that you have to think about more money monthly for home ownership than just the payment,
Right.
because I've also had clients that were new home owners that weren't totally prepared for that and then found themselves being a little surprised by, oh no, now the furnace is a thing and I have to
Right.
pay for that. Or, this stupid tree in my yard and this branch and it's hitting my roof and I have to pay somebody, an arborist or something.
Right.
There's just all of this stuff that they don't think about that you never had to think about as a renter. So it's also important, don't just look at that monthly payment. You need to, one of the numbers that people float is maybe 2% of the cost per home per year
Right.
to be mentally sort of tacked on to your expenses, just so you have a more realistic perspective.
Right. So I just wanted to give the sense. So if you're thinking about buying property, it is a good investment over time. Right, as Lacey was saying, you should think about it as a growth thing. But the idea behind buying, because it's so cost prohibitive anymore for most people. So you need to look at something that's in your price range. I just going to give this for example. This is not probably within most people's price range, but this is just, I don't know why you buy this house anyway. I don't really like this. This is just one I sort of picked at random. So this one is in Portland. It's $519,000. So just to give you a sense, look at this house. Would you pay $519,000 for this house? Lace?
No, that looks like one of the houses I could have been looking at when I first purchased my house that is in that area in
Mm-hmm.
it was maybe 2011 or something, but I would have been paying like
Yeah.
like under 200 for that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I would.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just to get that's just show you an example of the wow, it's gotten prohibitive. But here's the deal. So this is just Zillow. You can go on whatever site you want. I just want you to think about this. When you're buying a home, typically as a financial planner, what we're thinking about is what's it going to cost you every month. So Zillow is really nice because they'll give you an estimate. So right here, there's the estimate $3,219 a month for everybody. And what they're doing, the nice thing about Zillow here that I like about them is they're putting in not just the mortgage, but they're also putting in what is the insurance going to be and what are the taxes going to be.
I want to jump in on that taxes thing though. You have to actually double check that they put it in right.
Right.
They put in sort of an estimate. And sometimes when you look at the actual number, it'll tell you the actual number for taxes somewhere else, but that's not the number Zillow put in. So you sometimes have to change those a
Right.
little bit, but it does give you all those fields that you can play around with it too.
Right. The other thing about buying a house is this. It's not, I mean, if you're buying it and you're just going to live there forever, that's fine. But part of it too is if you're buying the house and you're thinking, okay, I'm going to buy it, and then later on I'm going to basically use it as an investment to resell it later or do something. You need to look at what's happened historically with the house. Now this one's an odd one. Now that I'm looking at it, because it sold in 2022 for $40,000, right? And now in 2024 they're trying to get 500,000 for it. So this one's probably a freaking lemon. There's something wrong, and I can tell you what it is, but what you want to look at is what did it sell for previously, and go back sort of historically and look at what the tax assessment was. So the tax assessment in 2022 was 110, and now they're saying it's about 112. This is a better sort of gauge on the tax assessment of how much it's growing. So this one's growing roughly about 3%. That's the underlying value. Somebody's trying to get more out of it. I can tell you why with this one just by looking at this, because the square foot of the house is 1,688 feet, which is not very big. It's about twice the size of your standard like 2-bedroom apartment for 4-bed, 2 baths. But the lot size is 5,200 square feet, which is really big. So what they're hoping to do is get this basically purchased by a company who's going to tear it up and build a convenience store or something. Right? Or some sort of equity investment kind of firm. So just to get a sense, you want to look at what's kind of my monthly and get a sense of that. And like Lacey said, double check it, because it's the Zillow estimate is never going to be, or the online estimate is never going to be exact. It's usually close, but sometimes they are way off. So like you said, check
Well, and
it.
frequently, like I said, I've had a lot of experience with these, and frequently they're plugging in this sort of arbitrary number for the taxes that's not actually what the taxes. So you have to go down to that thing that you just showed there,
Yeah.
where it shows what the taxes were the last year,
Right.
and figure out what the monthly taxes would be based on that, because that's not usually what the automatic calculator's putting in.
Right.
So you do have to fix it.
But just to get a sense, so that way when you're buying a house, think about what can I afford each month reasonably. And you don't want to be like breaking your wallet here. If you can keep it, under, I would say ideally you'd want to keep it to about a third of your paycheck, around there, every month. I wouldn't go over half. I mean, even that's kind of stretching it, but that's about where I would put it, just in sort of a rule of thumb. I mean, you're going to have to figure out your own budget and how that works, but that's how I always tell people to do it. Think about what it is you can afford reasonably, right, every month. And you got to factor in what are the utilities, if I'm, do I have to get flood insurance on this house because of where it's located, things like that. But you need to ask, and you can ask a realtor about all that stuff. But I think it's a good thing to do. I mean, right now, like I said, the market's still too hot, but there are places where, because of COVID, people have kind of abandoned, and now people are moving back, or not moving back, but there's still, you can get prices. So I know in Oregon, prices have come down pretty rapidly, especially around the Portland area. Not that place, for example. That place is right by the huge private university. But other places around, the city and the metro area have come down pretty significantly. Where, the house was, people were asking $500,000 last year, now they're asking $350,000. And 350 is not a bad score between 3,000 and 350, because you're looking at all in 2,000 to 3,000. So yeah, so something I think people should think about. Thinking about buying a home, it is a good way to build wealth and move forward. But
Geez, Duncan, but it really does still cycle back to wages, which is sort of where you opened this segment, because you say all in $2,000 to $3,000 per month.
You got to be making $5,000.
You got to be making $5,000, and that excludes a lot of people at this point because as those prices of those homes have gone up, their wages haven't gone up that much. So more and more people have been sort of shut out of 2 to 3 thousand per month, unless you're living with four roommates, and which you might be fine with doing, but you still got to be able to qualify for that loan, which
Right.
you don't do based on the idea, oh, I'm going to get roommates. Lender doesn't care to hear that.
Right. And the other thing too is you got to factor in is if you're buying a cheaper home like it's 150 or 200,000, it's going to be really small. It's probably going to have problems. And the thing you got to be really careful about is if you're buying a house for the first time and it's old or something, you got to make sure that it's up to shape and you can afford whatever repairs are on there before you negotiate the price. Because if you're walking into a house and it's got it like, what was I looked at one last year, and the foundation on the house was coming down, and they had said the couple had lived there before had buried like a gas tanker or an oil tanker kind of thing in the backyard to fuel the house. And so I'm like, okay,
That's
so
really common with older homes, and most people don't choose to deal with that part of it and just leave it there. That's very, very common. But a foundation, you can't sit and ignore it.
well, but even the oil tanker thing, I mean, part of the reason they had to warn me of that is because there was a possible leak, which means it could have
Mm.
contaminated the whole property. Which means, I mean, so now you're sitting there like, okay, well, how many hundreds of thousands of dollars or $1 million is it going to cost me to fix up this $400,000, $500,000 house? And is it worth it? No, not But once again, I mean, it's just things to think about. I mean, it was just a house I was looking at for a client, but it was just, I basically told him, no, screw that. Because after you buy the house, you got to buy to fix the house. So there's lots of little things that go into it, just to be careful. But it is something I think everybody should think about at some point, because it is a good way to build up wealth. Because what you do is you buy the starter house, and then when you make more money, you roll the equity from the starter house into the new house, which is the old strategy.
It could also be if you're thinking longer term, like that you're somebody who just wants to buy a place and stay in that place. If that is your intention, it can also be a good way, as I talk to clients about stabilizing their expenses.
Right. Well, everything starts with budgeting, yeah.
Your taxes, right, and it all goes back to it too. Your taxes will increase over time, but eventually, if you choose to stay put in the same house, you can have that paid off, and you can
Right.
really stabilize your expenses down the pipeline. I know that's many years away, but sitting in retirement, only really worrying about taxes and maintenance of a home versus a rent that's increased and is never going away. That's another way to look at it, looping back to future use budget too.
Right. But if you're also taking it and rolling the equity to a newer house, even though you're taking on, a home with higher cost value, equity value, or whatever it is, the beauty is you're rolling the equity in, so the payment's going to be lower because you're putting that down on the loan, the equity from the previous house. So you can roll it into bigger and bigger houses and still keep your payments down and still potentially, like Lacey said, if you spend it and you do it for 20, 30 years and you're consistent, you could potentially own your home, even though you've switched houses 2 or 3 times. Your final home, the bigger home, you could potentially own that in 20 or 30 years if you're consistent about paying it off and you keep rolling the equity. So, I mean, like I said, that's how the middle class was part of how they were formed in those countries. They were able to build up a lot of net worth in their homes. So it is a good thing to do, just in general. So I wanted to jump to one or two more real quick things, but consumer sentiment recently has been kind of low. It's the lowest in 7 months, according to Yahoo Finance. So consumer sentiment tumbled in June. So this is just how people are feeling about the growth of the economy. But the economy's been growing really well, as higher prices remains a pain point for Americans. That's what the big issue is. Higher prices remain a pain point. It's inflation's coming down, things are getting better, but when we say inflation's coming down, it doesn't mean the price went down. It means it's just not going up as fast as it used to be. And I think people get that confused, and so they're like, well, no, but milk still is whatever, $4 a gallon where it used to be 2. Right? So how is inflation getting better? Well, it is getting better because it stayed at 4 instead of shooting up to 6. right? But at the same point, you're still paying double what you paid 2 years ago. So I can see where people are still kind of down on the economy on that one. But that was just the
Sure.
University of
They don't
Michigan.
care about the arbitrary numbers. They care about what they're paying at the grocery store, the gas pump,
Right,
their utility bill. That's what they care about.
right. But why is this important to you? Is because I understand it's still expensive and it sucks. The upside is it's kind of flattened out now, so you're not going to see those huge jumps. At least not right now, right? And so you want to keep things that way with the economy. So this was from the University of Michigan, this where they got this consumer sentiment survey. Shows sentiment hit its lowest level in 7 months during June. The index reading for the month came in at 65.6, down from 69.1 in May, and lower than the 72 economists had expected. Assessments of personal finances dipped due to modestly rising concerns over high prices as well as weakening incomes. Survey of Consumers Director Joanne Hughes said in the statement, overall consumers perceive few changes in the economy from May. The current conditions index fell from 62.5 from 69.6 the month prior, contributing to the decline in June's headline index. Capital Economics North America economist Olivia Cross said Friday, readings show households are now struggling more under the weight of higher interest rates and still elevated consumer prices. So this is the two things that we've been sort of complaining about, and it's one of those where we get to be the mayor of I Told You Town. So we've said this. Look, yeah, prices were high after inflation. The economy's getting better. Wages are now outpacing inflation for the first time in our lifetimes, pretty much, or since we were children. So things are good. They're getting better, but the process is this: is it's easy for Trump to come in and screw things up with COVID and the economy to tank, right? Because of COVID or a war or something like that. It takes years to build it back, right? And that's what people don't get, and it's not going to happen overnight, right? It's like you can screw up, but it takes years to repair it, right? I can burn down a house in an evening, but it's going to take months to build it back. I mean, that's just how it goes. Um, so there's a reality here where things are good, but people don't feel it right now because it hasn't materially changed that much for them. Right. So I'm just trying to lay this out from the academic standpoint, why you should be positive, but cautious of where you're at. Um, I don't know if you had something you wanted to throw onto that, but that was kind of my assessment of it that they were given from Michigan.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you on all points. I honestly don't have anything to add.
Yeah. The only other thing I would throw in there is part of what we were complaining about was the Fed was like, well, we want to raise, the interest rates to quell inflation. I don't think it's done that. I think inflation came down on its own. Inflation was already coming down before the effect could really take place. So I don't
Right,
know that.
their action might not really have done much to help it along.
No, but I think it has hurt the middle class and the lower middle class quite a bit because now it's harder to buy shit. Things have gotten more
Right.
expensive because you can't get loans. So you can't buy a car or a house or a business, or it's harder to get student loans. So, I mean, just things like that. So that's where we were kind of, the little I told you so, but it's like, hopefully consumers will start to be more positive going forward. We'll see. Um, the other thing I wanted to talk about, goods inflation did stabilize. So that was the other positive I wanted to get into. Let me do this. So here it is. So goods inflation is finally fixed. Well, that's a nice way to say it. Kind of is. That's kind of true. Wall Street shared the latest inflation report, which showed prices rose less than expected from April to May. So this is last month. Stocks jumped a snappy 1% on the news. Consumers should be cheered too. 1 month's worth of economic numbers won't automatically ease the pressure on the family budget, which we just discussed. But one important trend is convincingly going the right direction. Inflation in goods is finally getting back to normal. So that's the nice thing. So now, like I was saying, as you go to the grocery store, it won't be jumping up as much. Because you talk about this, the pandemic triggered a huge shift in spending away from services towards goods, since it was hard to travel or eat out, but easy to order stuff online. The supply chain snafus also made products more scarce, and demand supply imbalances sent prices soaring. Plus, companies got greedy and realized they could jack up the price as much as they wanted. So in March of 2022, the 1 year inflation rate for goods peaked at 14.2%. The current annual inflation rate for goods is now back to something more reasonable, 0.1%. So, COVID really did a number on that. So, but the good news is it's now, the growth is flattened. The prices, some prices have come down a little bit, but they're not going to come down much. Once they hit that point, they usually don't come down. They usually stay there and go up. So that's just how it goes. And then the last thing I kind of wanted to talk about for the finance stuff is Trump, which unfortunately you still have to talk about him. Can't you? I'm hoping he'll lose. Hopefully he'll lose. I think he's gonna lose, and then we won't have to talk about him much after November. Just get rid of this.
That would be really nice.
This fucking guy.
I'm so tired of talking about this man.
He's so boring. So this is what's going on. CEOs. We had this whole discussion. Remember we had we watched the stuff from Davos, and Davos was all worried about, well, God, if Trump's president again, it's gonna, he's gonna deregulate a lot of the environmental stuff. We're gonna see more damage to the environment, which means more storms and stuff, which is gonna slow commerce. Plus, he's gonna be worse for the economy and wars, and he's gonna raise tariffs to a ridiculous percent. His other big plan was, I'm gonna get rid of. This was his thing that he threw out. I'm gonna get rid of income tax entirely. No more income tax. And I'm just going to make up the difference with tariffs. Okay? Well, to do that, you'd have to put an 85% tariff on all goods imported in the United States, which means inflation in the United States. Inflation would be
all that cheap stuff that we get from places like China would suddenly cost more to come into our country, right?
Well, yeah, but then even the local stuff, domestic stuff, that's more expensive now, right? Well, if the Chinese stuff that's coming in that people are usually buying, now they got to buy mine, so demand for my stuff has gone way up. Now I'm jacking up the prices on my stuff.
But if they go back to that cheap stuff from China, the price is still going to be way higher because they were more expensive for U.S. companies to acquire to get here anyway. Therefore, they're going to pass on that jacked up rate to you and your wallet. So either way you slice it, that kind of screws the consumer.
Well, but this is what happens. If you get rid of it, income tax hits the wealthy more than it hits the rest of us, right? And not as much as it should, but it does. Where we get hit, the rest of us, is on things like sales tax, transit tax, things like that. Having to get the goods, because most of our money goes to consuming, as where people who are ultra wealthy, most of their money goes into an investment account or into a business or something. They don't spend it. Yeah, percentage-wise. So that was kind of the thing. So there's a big fear with Trump that he's going to fuck up the economy and fuck up the consumer. And so businesses are really worried globally. And this article I saw was a recent one. Why CEOs fear Trump. Kind of similar stuff. So after 34 felony counts in New York on May 31st, Donald Trump is getting back to business as usual, including an off-the-record chat with dozens of CEOs in Washington, D.C. on June 13th. This is a couple weeks ago. Whether they support his antics or not, CEOs have to take Trump seriously as a presidential candidate, given that he's the only realistic alternative to incumbent President Joe Biden, and he could win. And potentially, I don't think so. But Trump remains committed to low taxes and light regulation, which businesses like. Right? They don't want to have to pay a lot of their income or their profits to taxes, and they don't like to be regulated very much because that costs money and time. Making him a natural choice for business people, at least based on those policies. However, there's also considerable trepidation about a second Trump presidency among business leaders. In its latest quarterly survey of businesses, research firm Oxford Economics asked if a second Trump president would represent a geopolitical risk. 34% said Trump would pose a very significant political risk if he won the White House again, and 42% said it would pose a significant risk. So 76% of businesses see Trump as some sort of threat to operations. That's 3 out of 4 major companies see him as a threat to the economy, the world economy. Oxford asked about other types of geopolitical risks, such as hostilities in the Middle East, a clash between Russia and NATO, and the military alliance. The conflict between China and Taiwan all scored lower than Trump in terms of representing a very significant risk. Some business leaders literally worry more about Trump than they worry about major wars. So think about that. You're a business, you're moving goods internationally. A war is a nightmare for you in some ways because it makes it difficult to get your goods moved. Especially if you got to go through war zones and stuff. It raises your cost, or you got to go another direction, right? Or go around it. Plus, it also, when you have wars in certain countries, it limits what goods you can get. So, like, Ukraine is a great example. And just from the economic standpoint, you realize Ukraine produces 40% of the grain for bread on the planet. Almost half of that comes from Ukraine. So when you look to go to the store and you realize, hey, bread is up quite a bit. That's why, because
Well,
there's less of it. I mean, that's why wars are. I mean, they're negative to your pocket. They're great for corporations in some ways, but not forever, and not some. A lot of these sustained kind of conflicts we have anymore are not very good. So worries about Trump. So how serious are the following geopolitical risks to the global economy over the next 2 years? So have they rated very significant, significant, not significant? China, Taiwan, pretty good, right? They were like, yeah, like 80%, 81% thought it was a threat. Middle East, yeah, 85%. Russia, NATO, yeah, pretty high. Trump presidency, yep, still 76% thought he was a risk to the global economy.
wow.
So there's reasons for this, but I mean, we said it. I mean, just the stuff he's proposing, the things he's going to do, it would damage everything, and it would really hurt the consumer, which is you and me. You know.
Well, and let's just be honest. He's a bit of a loose cannon, and you know, the global economy likes things to be at least a little predictable, like and Trump just he feels an emotion and then he fires off some crazy choice based
Right.
on it that has really big impact if he's sitting in the driver's seat.
Yeah, and he's got all these nutbags. It's not him that's the threat so much as the dipshits that are going to come with him. And their kind of crazy sort of culture war, political war shit that they're doing, which has nothing to do with what you should really be focusing on as a president. At least not in my opinion. I mean, as a president, you should be focusing on stability. You should be focusing on getting people rights, making sure people have better quality lives, things like that. You shouldn't be worried about stupid shit like like freaking out about the border until there's an actual issue, right? But speaking of stupid cultural shit, let's move into some clip stuff. I have a fun one. So Louisiana recently, for those of you who haven't heard, just passed a law. The governor signed it that requires all the schools, public schools in Louisiana, to post the Ten Commandments, and it's really specific on like it has to be a certain size font and all this shit. It's weird, right? But it's one of those things where it's like, why? I'm like, didn't the Supreme Court deal with this like 30 or 40 years ago that you can't do that? And now you guys are passing a law that the precedent is you can't. Well, they are, and part of the reason is this is part of the Supreme Court is so corrupt and right wing now because you figure four of the justices, or 4 or 5, maybe it's 5, I can't remember exactly, but were selected by Bush Jr. and Trump, right? So they're pretty right wing. Plus, you got to figure those two presidents. So 4 or 5 of the 9 justices were selected by presidents who didn't even win the popular vote. So they represent the minority of the country, and they're pretty corrupt now. They're taking money and bribes, and I mean they're just making shit up. The Roe v. Wade thing didn't make a whole lot of sense. Their justification was from 2 guys who weren't even Americans because America hadn't been formed yet. That's how old the legal precedent they were digging from was. And it was crazy. But the main guy for they chose for his legal precedent for getting rid of Roe v. Wade. His big claim to fame was burning women to the stake for witchcraft. And that was how they justified it. So the Supreme Court's off their fucking rockers. So these right-wing Christian nationalist groups want to push Christian values and all that nonsense onto the country, not really understanding the Constitution. They see this, and this is how Louisiana sees this, is we're going to pass this now, we're going to get sued on it, but we're hoping it goes to the Supreme Court. And since we know the Supreme Court's all corrupt and right-wing, hopefully the Supreme Court will rule in our favor, and it'll become national law. That's what they're going for. But it's all backwards, and everybody's kind of making fun of them. I don't know that it'll go that far, but here's one of the women who wrote the bill. She's on CNN. This guy does a pretty good job of roasting her, but I want to kind of double down because this is just insane. So this is one of the women who wrote the bill. So check this out.
Discuss is one of the co-authors of House Bill 71, Louisiana State Representative Lauren Ventrella. State Representative, thank you so much for being with us to share your perspective. Does the bill specify what kind of penalty teachers like that will face?
There's not any penalty under the law. It's just a requirement that the classrooms should post what we know and believe is the moral fabric, the moral fiber of our country that should be on public display, that the school children should have the opportunity to read and be exposed to.
So when you talk about the moral fiber of our country, you realize that this country is an amalgamation of cultures, right, and different faiths. And even within Christianity, people don't interpret those commandments the same way.
Well, what's important about this bill and what's important to remember about this country is that whether we like it or not, Moses is in the Supreme Court of the United States. The 10 Commandments are in the Supreme Court of the United States.
Okay. So, already she's just full of shit. Right? I mean, this is just craziness. First off, there are like 3,000 denominations of Christianity just in this country. And they all have different takes on it and which ones are the 10. But the other thing about it is the Supreme Court, which is like the Supreme Court and Moses is in the Supreme Court. Okay, I don't know what that meant.
I want to know which one of them is Moses. Which one of them is Moses? So please tell us in the comments which Supreme Court justice is Moses.
Well, and I want to remind everybody too. The Jewish Historical Society of Jerusalem got $1 billion and spent 10 years with the Israeli government trying to prove Exodus happened, and what they proved was Exodus never happened. There were no Hebrews in Egypt at that time, so there couldn't have been an Exodus. So the whole Moses story is bullshit. Plus, if you look up on Google Maps, it says they spent 40 years in the desert, but you can walk from Cairo to Jerusalem in 6 days. So how do they spend 40 years lost in the desert? That just makes no sense. But just her talking about the Supreme Court and whatnot. But yeah, see, civil liberties groups are already going to start filing lawsuits because they have to. Because we're going to have that, but we can't have, Buddhism or Satanism or any of that stuff in there. But I wanted to go to this point of this article where the law violates long-standing Supreme Court precedent in the First Amendment. More than 40 years ago, in Stone versus Graham, the Supreme Court overturned a similar state statute holding that the First Amendment bars public schools from posting the Ten Commandments in the classroom. No other state requires the Ten Commandments to be displayed in public schools. So that's just... So when she says that's in the Supreme Court, she's full of shit. Do you need a minute or?
No, I'm fine.
Okay. So
I gotta tell you, I am just absolutely, I am not putting the Ten Commandments in my classroom. I am not in that state, but I am not putting that up. Can you imagine in New York City doing something like that when we have Jewish students, Christian students, Muslim students, and students that are none of those things, you know?
Well, and the whole thing is, I'll watch another second of this, but it kills me that this is just stupid. This whole thing is just stupid, how they're doing this whole thing. Let me play this.
Moses is on the law in Congress. This is part and ingrained in our nation. This is a historical document that's important in Louisiana, because in Louisiana, we believe in faith, family, and freedom. And that.
Okay, the three F's. Anyway, it's not a historical document. Historians don't consider it a historical document. It's literature. Literally, in school, you can teach the Bible as literature. You can't teach it as history because it's not historical. Are there historical things in it? Sure. But, you know, there's historical things in Spider-Man, too.
Well, I do remember, this is not a public high school or anything like that, but I remember at Portland State, when we went there, they had a Bible as literature course,
Most colleges
which was
do.
interesting. Yeah. So, I mean, there are a lot of ways that, you know, people can get that education even within a public system if they want to, but this is a horse of another color.
Right. Well, I do love that. Here's where she's talking about it's important to Louisiana. This is the problem, I think, with the whole system there, is Louisiana ranks 47th out of all 50 states in education. They're one of the worst states to educate your children in. They're terrible. Why are we spending millions of dollars to legislate the Ten Commandments, which most don't even apply anymore in the United States, and we're not spending the money on Common Core curriculum or trying to make sure all the kids have lunches or books or computers or no. We got to make sure they have the fucking Ten Commandments. Timmy can't even pass the basic military exam to get into the Army because we didn't educate him. Right? He can't get a school lunch every day, but he's got the Ten Commandments in the proper font and size on the wall every day when he goes there. I mean, it's so stupid. And I love to. We can go through the commandments. I'm going to skip all that, but because a lot of them don't, like, thou shalt have no other God before me. Well, the First Amendment allows you to have any God you want, right? You know, adultery legal in the United States, coveting legal. In fact, our whole economy is based on coveting. I mean, we're capitalists.
Shopping malls base their entire business model on coveting everything you see in that darn window.
Yeah. Have you ever seen a billboard or a TV commercial or listened to the radio? Yeah. You want that. Yeah, I do want
Coveting.
a Coke. I do want a Coke right now. He's got a point.
So basically everybody that goes into marketing has a degree in coveting.
It just cracks me up. But the other thing I wanted to joke, because this is just funny to me. So I'm gonna read you guys something, because I was remembering. So she's up there doing this, and it's always ironic to me when women do shit like this. There's Christian women. Sorry, let me qualify that, like ultra Christian women, because in Timothy 2:11, in the Bible, the Timothy basically says women are not allowed to teach or have authority over men. Right? So Timothy 2:11, let the woman learn in silence. So this is just a breakdown of what that is. So the apostle goes on to give some other instructions to women, how they should behave themselves in public worship. You should be paying attention, Lacey. In the church of God, he would have them be learners and not teachers. Sit and hear and learn more of Christ and of the truth of the gospel and maintain good works. And he would have them learn in silence and not offer to rise and speak under a pretense
All right, then
of
this
having,
is me paying attention.
having a word of the Lord, or being under the impulse of the Spirit of the Lord, as some frantic women have done. You know, women get frantic.
Yeah, I'll show you, frantic.
I know. But it's also covers in Timothy and other stuff. Women shouldn't adorn themselves modestly and sensibly, not braided hair, nor gold or pearls or costly attire, right?
Wait, not braiding their hair?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Oh, good grief.
Those Jezebels.
You know what? I braid my hair like at least 3 times a week, so
Right.
apparently, I don't know.
You teach.
The harlot of the South Bronx. I wear braided hair in my classroom.
Yeah, you teach, and you're on this show giving opinions. So, yeah, you're already pissing off Jesus right now. Anyway, I just think it's funny.
Burn me at the stake.
I just think it's funny. The woman who co-authored this, who's advocating this, who's pushing this bill to put authority over men and to tell them what to teach, it's a woman whose Bible tells her not to do this specifically. That just cracks me up. So and specifically tells her not to adorn herself or wear expensive clothes or jewelry or, I don't know, makeup. That's an expensive suit. That's a gold brooch, gold necks. I can tell you those eyelashes
are not hers.
Yep.
Those are definitely not her eyelashes.
Gold necklace, gold earrings. I bet it cost $200 to do her hair. I just love it. The people that are pushing this shit don't even read the Bible. I just love it. And she's on TV lecturing a man? The shit she's pushing, she wouldn't have the job she has. If she had her way, and we went to an evangelical sort of Christian, she wouldn't have her job. She'd be at home right now. Waiting for her husband to come home and beat her or something. I don't know.
Barefoot and pregnant? I don't...
yeah, pretty much. She wouldn't have the nice jewelry and the clothes she has. That's the thing that kills me. She doesn't really see the end run of what they're trying to accomplish. And she's up there spearheading it for them. Yeah, take away my rights. So, anyway, that was just funny stuff from Louisiana. We'll move on to some other stuff here. So, election's coming up. What happens, and this has been asked to me a bunch of times, what happens if Biden wins, what happens if Trump wins? If Biden wins, he's just going to continue on. It depends on if he gets this House and the Senate. But if he does, they'll definitely, Roe v. Wade will be law. The Democrats will push that through. That's a big one they'll push through right away. They're going to definitely want to push through forgiving student loans, which will be a huge boost to the economy right out of the gate. And they'll probably want to do more infrastructure and getting cost downs on drugs and things like that. And putting caps, because they capped insulin. But if Trump becomes president, what's going to happen? Well, he's the dictator for the day, and like we said, tariffs and whatnot. But, because he's kind of crazy. But, it's not really Trump that you have to worry about. Just like it's not really Biden, because they're old. It's the people that they bring with them. So when you're voting for president, a lot of people are like, well, I like this guy, I'd have a beer with him, and I'm like, I'm not voting for the guy necessarily as much as I'm voting for their positions and the team I'm pretty sure they're going to bring with them. Because those are the people that are going to be running everything. And you usually don't know who they are, but you know who their boss is. And that's kind of how you vote. Well, here are the people behind...
Which manager do I trust to be, like, in charge of hiring?
Right. Exactly.
You know, for the things that will impact me. Who is going to hire the right people?
Right. Exactly. It's so that's the point. So the people that it's a little reverse with Trump. There's a group called Project 2025. I think they're with the Heritage Foundation, some other these right-wing sort of think tank groups. They're the ones who tell Trump what to do. So they're the ones who picked the Supreme Court justices. They handed Trump a list, and he just pointed and picked a guy off the list. And it really didn't matter. They're the ones who are telling him what policies to do and whatnot. So Trump doesn't really give a shit about any of this. He just wants to be president and be in power and do what he wants. He doesn't really care about this stuff. So they tell him what to do. That's why they like him, because he's a puppet. They don't have to convince him, they just tell him. Right? Well, this is what Project 2025, this is sort of a taste of it. This is Rachel Maddow on The View, and she's talking about this and why you should care. Because this is what they want to do, and Trump will fall into line.
Yeah. So here's the thing. When Donald Trump won the election in 2016, fair and square, he said it was rigged. Right. He won the Republican primaries. He said they were rigged. He ran for re-election in 2020. Before the election, he said it was rigged. Mm-hmm. Then when he lost the election, he said it was rigged. He does not like elections. He does not like voting as a system by which we decide who's going to be the president.
Yeah, right.
When he was running for re-election in 2020, the Republican Party decided they were no longer going to have a platform. They abolished their platform and said, our new platform is whatever Donald Trump wants, we're for that.
That's right.
So if you don't stand for anything other than what he wants, you don't vote, you just put him in power.
Yeah.
And once he's there, nobody is allowed to disagree with him or say anything that he doesn't believe.
And what
It's
is
just-
that called?
That is what a lot of other countries all around the world have, and it is not democracy.
Right. Yeah.
And so he's trying to get rid of the American system of government, and that means getting rid of a government that does anything other than serve him, and that's what Project 2025 is all about.
Yeah.
And that exists everywhere in the world, and it has never existed here before. And so I really think the bottom line here is that Trump and his movement, they are not running against Democrats. They're running against democracy.
Yeah.
They're running against the
That's right.
democratic process. They want to radically change
Yeah.
the kind of system that we have, the government that we have.
Yeah.
And we're alive as American citizens in that time, and we're going to be the ones who decide if the American system of government survives or if it's taken over instead by a strongman authoritarian form.
Right. And this is what Steve Bannon wanted.
Yeah.
And predicted.
So she kind of summed it up in a nutshell, but it does include a lot of stuff like that. Like they want to bring back impounding powers from the president, which means that any money that's cleared by Congress, right now the president has to. So if you're Congress, Lacey, and you tell me, the president, hey, you need to give this money to Mexico for whatever. You guys voted on it, right? Passed it. I have to give the money to Mexico. It used to be, and this was up until Nixon, that they changed this, that the president had what's called impounding power, which means you give me the money to give to Mexico, but then I could tell Mexico, I'm not going to give you the money because I disagree with Congress, so I'm going to override them. Well, I'm sorry, the House has the power of the purse, not the president. They tell him where to spend the money, right? He just controls, the executive branch. So there's a separation of powers there. So they want to get rid of a lot of that. And just basically say, we're going to put our thumb on the scale and we're going to decide. So what she's talking about is true, is they want to do minority rule. And they're very blatant about it. We want just white Republican conservative men to rule. And Trump's going to be our vessel to get there. So, just giving you a taste of what the future holds. It's going to be more of this.
Well,
less
on
right
that
for
note,
women. Go ahead.
on that note, I feel a little nauseous. Bleh.
That's what I'm saying. I mean, it's disturbing, but everybody's talking about, well, how could this happen and blah blah blah. And, Trump supporters, hate. I mean, they hate everybody else, but these people have been around. The neo-Nazis, the skinheads, they're always around. They're just getting smaller and smaller in number every year. There'll always be some, but it's just one of those things where, in the 90s, in the 80s and 90s, it was okay to basically humiliate and make fun of gay people. By the 2000s, not so much. And nowadays, it's still pretty taboo. And the people that do it on the right wing make a ton of money doing it because they still appeal to that group that wants to do it. As where most of society moved on and said, look, I'm a straight guy, I'm doing my thing, I don't really care what the gay people do, but I certainly don't want them to be, tortured and humiliated, and I don't want to see that shit. I'd like that.
No.
Oh, I know gay people. I don't want them to be fired or kicked out of their homes for their sexual preferences or who they love. I don't care. That's how most people are, but there's still always going to be that percentage of people who are just that tribal, where I hate them, right? And Trump represents that group. Yeah. He's running on, I'm going to get all the people you don't like. As opposed to, I'm going to do shit for you.
Gee, if I think back in history, there's one particular man that comes to my mind.
A few of them, yeah.
That did that. I'm thinking about one in particular that the Germans would really like to forget. But there are others, certainly.
But remember, Hitler wasn't elected, he was appointed by the Third Reich. The Third Reich was elected into power. And that's kind of what they want to do here in sort of the reverse. We're going to get Trump in.
I was going to say that. that doesn't feel completely removed from
No,
this
no, it's not.
situation.
It's not. It's pretty much what they're similar kind of thing. We want to get our guy into power so that we can control him and put our finger on the lever, and then we can get whatever we want and remove the people we don't want. Why do you think Trump and the Republicans are always running on the border issue? Okay, and immigration. When they say immigrants, they're not talking about people from Norway. They're talking about brown people. We don't want more brown people in this country. And the thing they don't get is if you got somebody from Norway, they're more likely to be a liberal atheist as opposed to somebody from Mexico who's more likely to be a conservative Catholic. They're more likely to get voters from Mexico and Panama and Venezuela, the Republicans are, than Democrats are. But they blow that all the water, and a lot of those people don't like them because they get here and they realize, oh, they hate us because we're brown. Because we tan. But that's how it goes. But that's what it is. That's essentially, at the end of the day, you're always going to have that contingent just fucking everything up. Because they want to be in power. They want to control women. They don't want brown people working with them. They don't want to turn on TV and see two men kissing or, an interracial family. Heaven forbid. That one pisses people off. Just ask my parents.
Geez, what are we in the 1950s? Like, seriously.
That's the joke, though, is that's the Republican base, and that's what they've been courting, and especially after Sarah Palin, and that's what they're stuck with. And it's a dwindling group. It's not an expansive group that keeps growing. Because as people go along with technology and whatnot, we see more people. Remember, like when we went to college. I don't know if you remember this. I went out one night with a bunch of people, and there was this one girl, and she was from a small town. Right? Well, it's all pretty much white people. And she spent the whole night commenting on, what is that person doing? Or what is that? And it's like pointing at black people and shit. And you're like, they're just hanging out. Just, just because they're black doesn't mean they're going to rob you. You're more likely to get robbed by the homeless white guy who's starving. And you can't really blame him. But I remember, she saw a drag queen for the first time and she lost her shit. And that's the difference, though, is we grew up with that shit. We don't think much about it. We went to college in the city. We don't think much. We walk out of the door, we expect to see everybody. If you walked out of the door and everybody was one color, you'd start to panic a little bit. Like, where the fuck is the diversity? What fascist regime did I walk into?
So on that 2 points, I did not grow up with any of that
No,
stuff
I know.
because I grew up from a tiny, tiny little town in North Dakota. So when I moved to Portland, where I met you, that was sort of my first experience in really seeing people that were different from myself in lots of different ways.
Right.
Gender representation and sexual orientation. I did have a little experience with diversity in terms of, ethnic diversity because there was an Air Force base not far. So we got some, influx of people from every nationality there, in smaller quantities, of course.
Right.
But that being said, there's something to be said in the upbringing. I was very fortunate in that I had a mother that sort of taught me from the time I was the little kid that everyone was more the same than they were different. So that was sort of my worldview. And I don't know that she exactly knew how to teach these things because she was from a tiny little place. She was a farm girl. Right. But at bare minimum, I did walk into adult life with a little more curiosity and open-mindedness, despite what I didn't know. And I don't know that everyone from those tiny communities exactly get that.
No, and that's the thing, is they're from those tiny communities, and now they turn on their TV, and it's not all white people anymore. And it's not all straight people anymore. And it frustrates them. And they're upset. And they're scared. That things are changing too fast. And it's like, no, this has been going on for a long time. You just live in, podunk nowhere. So you don't see it every day. But if you live in the suburbs of the city, you see it every day. And it's, we don't care. It's just more people to sell shit to for us in the capitalist industries, right? You know, I don't care if it's a gay couple or an interracial couple or a single person. I don't care. I just want, I want people to get along and live great lives so we can all prosper and do well.
Right.
Me and Spock. So, but yeah, no, I just think it's interesting. But that's what's coming down the pipeline with Trump. I did want to get into this because the debate's coming up pretty soon, and they've been pushing a lot on the mental acuity. Or are they still both there? Because they're both dirt old. Biden's, 80, 81? Trump's like 70, 77 or 78, something like that. But Trump has been sort of steadily declining mentally for years, if you ask me. But that's just my opinion. I can't prove that. But it's interesting because you're getting all this push that Biden's getting slow, and it's like, yeah, he's slow, but they're saying he's like mentally not there. But you don't hear that from anybody who personally works for Biden or works with Biden. But all these people that worked with Trump or have worked for Trump are all coming out saying, yeah, he has mental problems. Right? And there's a guy recently who just published a book it's called Apprentice in Wonderland. We're going to look at it real quick. He was on Morning Joe talking about this. He interviewed him a bunch after he was president to write this book. And he said Trump has got serious problems. So we're going to watch a clip from this because I thought this was interesting.
Satuda also shares several behind-the-scenes secrets, including how Trump was humiliated by his initial salary of $25,000 per episode. So he hatched a poorly received plan to become one of the richest men in television by asking for $6 million per episode, equal to the combined salary of the cast of Friends at the time. And the author of Apprentice in Wonderland, Ramin Satuda, joins us now. He's also co-editor-in-chief for Variety. It's great to have you on this morning.
Ramin, it is so fascinating. You talk about this sort of Alice in Wonderland through the looking glass thing that was created by Trump and Burnett. I still remember business people in Manhattan just dying laughing at the prospect of Donald Trump being this great businessman when they all had stories about, his bankruptcies or his failure to pay bills or you name it, his bad judgment as a business person. And yet TV made this reality true for millions of Americans, and Donald Trump has dined off of it since.
This is the story. This is the reason why Donald Trump became president of the United States. This is the reason why he is now the nominee and could become president of the United States again. And I think the important thing about this book, what I want everyone to know, is it's based on a lot of access to Donald Trump. I interviewed him starting in 2021. I, as a journalist, spent more time with him than any other journalist since he left the White House on the record. We talked a total of 6 times. We were sitting together in the boardroom at Trump Tower watching clips of The Apprentice together. And yes, this book is about the show and the warped reality that we all live in. But it's also a story about a president in exile. Donald Trump's mental temperament in the months after he left the White House, his desire for revenge, his fixation on famous people. Joe, he's actually very fixated still on you. He talked in very specific detail about an interview that you did in 2015 where Lawrence O'Donnell was questioning how much money he made off of The Apprentice. Most presidents post-presidency are thinking of happier thoughts or thinking of...
Yeah, so, I mean, he's kind of in a mental state. This guy also goes on to talk about, and I don't want to watch the whole clip, but he goes on to talk about interviewing Trump, and Trump couldn't remember that he interviewed him a couple months earlier, even though he'd spent hours with the guy. And he interviewed him several times. And then he would talk about, okay, I'm interviewing Trump, and then Trump's like, excuses himself, and he's like, oh, I got to go upstairs and deal with the Afghanistan thing. He's not president, and he thinks he's president. Why is he dealing with Afghanistan? He's not even in the government. Right? So, yeah, I mean, he just talked about the guy was just out there. Couldn't remember a lot of stuff. Couldn't tell you much of what's going on. We did the whole thing where Trump's been glitching and talking about Hannibal Lecter and sharks and just weird stuff. Windmills killing whales. I mean, he's been doing that for a long time, but it's just all way out there.
Listen, that might really just be a part of what's happening with him as he's aging, and that's sad. You don't want, one of your family members, your uncle, your grandfather, or whatever, having that experience. So in that respect, I feel for him. But if that's where the aging process is bringing him, I don't want him to be the captain of the ship I'm on.
Well, no, and I'm not. I mean, worst case scenario, both him and Biden are losing it. I don't think that's the case. I think Trump is. I think Biden's still healthy. Biden rides a bike, a couple times a week or whatever. Biden's still in decent shape. Biden's just old, and he's slow. Trump is old and slow, but Trump is also. I mean, Trump's jacked up a lot too. But Trump, I think, is just mentally he's gone. I think he's lit a really unhealthy life. He eats a lot of crap. He's, we know he takes a lot of Adderall and shit like that. I mean, he's, there have been rumors that he's been incontinent for like the last 25 or 30 years. He has to wear a diaper. Yeah, I mean, I don't think he's in top form. I think he has got some sort of Parkinson's or dementia or something bad. But also I wanted to point out, because that's interesting to talk about, his ability to make decisions was kind of factored into this with his mental ability. But he has a long history of making bad decisions before, when he was younger, right? And I wanted to go into just what a worthless businessman he is. So recently, he has the stock ticker DJT for the Trump Media Company. If you guys don't remember, if you're new to the show, I bet I shorted it. So I am up a lot of money right now because it's tanking. So anyway, I'm not recommending you short things. I'm just saying it was fun. But I wanted to show this because
he's just running his victory lap and taking the opportunity to tell everybody about his victory lap.
Gloat,
Let's call a spade a spade. But you know what? I'm gonna high five you through the monitor here.
There you go.
Boom. Good job.
When you gamble, you always tell the story about when you win. You never tell about when you lose. So, but I wanted to get this because when you have a public company, you got to place out. And so we'll jump into stocks, media technology group and where it's at. He had a little dead cat bounce the other day, but it's been way down. Let's look at, where's the advanced chart? There it is. Come on, baby. There we go. All right, so if we're looking at overall, I mean, it went way up when it first came out, and then it, boom, bottomed out and tanked. Then it came back up for a while there, and now it's back down and tanked again. And the company itself last quarter lost, they only made like $700,000 for the quarter. The CEO, Devin Nunes, is getting paid like $5 million a year, just to give you a concept of how under. But they lost millions and millions. I think it was a couple, like $200 or $300 million. So they are way in the hole. So you're talking about a company that's absolutely negative, that's floated on investor money. And that's all it is. So your money is going to a company that's worth nothing, which is why I bet against it. But he's got a long, long history of screwing up. And you can do that when your dad gives you $400 million in a company. You can screw up everything for the rest of your life, and you'll still be richer than all the rest of us. It's just, that's the problem with our system. But I had this article I wanted to show. So Trump's business acumen, we need to call it like it is. So it came down to it. So they talk about going into business is risky and it's hard. Okay. So one of the most important factors required to move a business from startup to ongoing success is adequate capital, which Trump always has had because Daddy gave it to him. That means a business person must have plenty of money to sustain operations while business builds sales and revenues. If it runs out of money, it runs out of time, and the business fails. This is the first rule of business. So they talk about this, but then they go through Trump's different ventures in this whole thing, and they point out that, I mean, he's failed almost entirely. He's almost never had a success. I mean, it's very rare. They talk about Digital World stock that we just looked at. It's plunged more than 75% in 6 months. So you lost 3/4 of your money if you were an initial investor, of what your value was. If you were an initial investor, you're way up, but still, you're still down from where you were. Other Trump businesses have stiffed vendors before. When they talk about business people laughing at him when Morning Joe mentioned that. That's what they're talking about, including contractors that were left unpaid for more than 2.98 million after repairs to the Trump International Hotel. I mean, he stiffed a small business owner out of $100,000 worth of pianos. In all fairness, $100,000 worth of pianos is like 2 or 3 pianos. So, but unpaid bills at the Trump Taj Mahal Casino Resort in Atlantic City amounted to $90 billion. I want to remember that. He tanked like 2 or 3 casinos. A business where you literally just print money. And the way he did it was he built them all next to each other and they cannibalized each other. And he spent way too much money. Incredibly basic, stupid shit. You don't build, like if I have a store, I don't build a competitive store across the street. Because now I'm paying for 2
you
stores.
pick a different neighborhood where you can maybe eat up somebody else's competition, but you're not eat up your own.
Right, because now
business.
I'm paying for 2 businesses for 1 set of customers. That makes no sense. He did it for 3. Right, so it's insane. You got to remember, Trump,
Sort of like, would you have your McDonald's franchise and then build another McDonald's of your own across the street from it? No, right?
Right. You know.
That's what he's doing.
Yeah, but it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, there's Trump Steaks, Trump Vodka, Trump Airlines, Trump University, all failed. I mean, and the list goes on and on and on. I mean, the guy he can't get anything right. He's a total fuck up. And everything about him is fiction. And it was all built on the show The Apprentice, which was reality TV, but it was fictional that he was a successful businessman. He wasn't. He was in the hole by billions of dollars when that show aired.
Hence, he did the show.
Right. Yeah, a real business person wouldn't be doing the
so
show.
Successful with his businesses, he'd be kind of busy dealing with his businesses and doing that. But he was in the hole looking for another place to get some money. I mean, that's right.
Yeah, I watched a couple episodes of The Apprentice when it came out because I just thought it was funny. Because it was the first season was all these young people out of like that just got their MBAs or their master's degrees in finance or something in business. They were all really sharp, and you could tell they were on the show with him, and he would be talking, and all these younger people would be looking at each other like, this guy's a fucking idiot. He doesn't know what he's talking about. Right? It was just funny. But to your point, I remember he had 2 executives that were from one of the businesses, were from a company that owned, I think, a lot of the stuff, and they just put his name on it for, whatever retail value. And he had them on as guests, and they were 2 executives, and they just looked fucking agitated the entire episode. And they were only on for like 20, 30 minutes. But they looked just agitated, like, why are we here? This is such a waste of time. But, yeah, that's just what it is. But yeah, I just wanted to get into that. Just what a screw up the guy is. I mean, it's just such a failure. What else do we have? Let's take a second. So that was Trump on that one. I did want to get into. Oh, here's a fun one. So we'll end with this one. This is a good one. So I think I got the right one here. So recently, Donald Trump was, I don't know if you know this, Lacey, he was convicted of a felony, 34 felonies.
Oh, man.
Yeah, lots of felonies.
A felony or 2 or 34.
34.
I don't know.
34. He's
Something
also,
like that.
yeah, he was also adjudicated as a rapist and found civilly liable for what was almost $90 million. And he was also adjudicated for civil fraud, where he committed fraud against the people of New York.
I've got a great idea. Let's let a guy like that run the whole country.
Yeah, that sounds like a plan. And he's up for sentencing coming up on the 11th of July. So we'll see. My bet is the judge is going to give him some time, but probably postpone it till after the election, just to avoid the constitutional issue. But I'm guessing he's going to get anywhere probably 6 months to a year. I don't think they'll give him probation, because you only give probation to people you think are going to complete probation. Do you really think Trump's going to comply with probation? And do you really want to put a probation officer through that? That makes no sense. But is it a good or bad idea to have a felon in the White House? I don't know. But somebody does have an opinion on it, and we're going to go back to Morning Joe real quick. Here's somebody. They're going to talk about somebody who has an opinion about whether or not felons should be allowed in the White House.
Folks, she shouldn't be allowed to run. Okay, shouldn't. There's virtually no doubt that FBI Director Comey and the great special agents of the FBI will be able to collect more than enough evidence to garner indictments against Hillary Clinton and her inner circle, despite her efforts to disparage them and to discredit them. If she were to win this election, it would create an unprecedented constitutional crisis. In that situation, we could very well have a sitting president under felony indictment and ultimately a criminal trial. It would grind government to a halt.
Wow.
Well, that was then candidate Donald Trump just 3 days before the 2016 election.
So I hate to say it, but I agree with Donald Trump. We shouldn't have anybody in the White House who's under felony indictment or has a felony conviction. It would grind government to a stop. It would ruin everything. He's right. He's right. Just to remind you, he's just been found guilty of 34 counts of felonies in New York, e-felonies. And he's under indictment in Georgia for RICO, for trying to interfere with the election. He's under indictment in Florida for the illegal documents, or the top secret documents he stole from the U.S. government and tried to hide. And he's under indictment for January 6th, trying to lead the insurrection. So, yeah. And these other guys have been indicted in Arizona and Wisconsin, which he might get indicted in soon. So, yeah. Unprecedented constitutional crisis. Should not be in office. I agree with him 100% on that.
I never thought I'd be saying I agree with him too, but okay. So, in my classroom, I teach rhetoric, and I teach my kids about these if-then statements in logic. So if what Donald Trump said was true then it also applies to now. So good job. And any of my students, if you're watching, which rhetorical device was this? Leave it in the comments below.
In the comments.
Or any of our other audience members. Why not?
Well, I think the other great lesson here is the less a man is to make declarative statements, the less of a fool he is to look in retrospect. Because anything Donald Trump says, you can find a clip of him saying the exact opposite thing.
Well, he just never stops talking is part of it.
Well, and he doesn't think.
He can't ever just not have something to say about something. He's got to have something to say, and it has to be these very big declarative statements, you know?
Yeah. Well, I watched a clip where Woody Harrelson, I guess, the actor, had dinner with him once. And he's like, I regretted the whole thing. He's like, because we were there for whatever, an hour and a half, and I said, I don't think I got a word in. He just talked the whole time. I guess he was there with like Jesse Ventura or somebody, I can't remember. But yeah, I agree. Trump should not be allowed in the White House. Hillary, on the other hand, never been indicted, let alone convicted.
I bet she just hangs out, retired, watches some of this stuff and just shakes her head and goes, you know what? You could have had this all another way.
Well,
You know?
yeah, and part of it too is Comey did that thing. And I want to point this out because I thought this was interesting. I read recently an article, and they were talking about polls they did after the 2016 election. And this is the problem. More people heard about the Hillary email things than the Trump grab him by the pussy thing. There were more people that had heard about that. That's the problem. Is we got to get out there and point it out to everybody that this guy is a convicted felon. He's still under indictment for more felonies and more serious crimes. He's potentially looking at spending the rest of his life going between prison and a courtroom. He's just been fined over $500 million for defamation, for fraud, defamation for rape. He's got 26 women who've credibly accused him of sexual assault or rape. At least one or two of them were 12 or 13 at the time that he raped them. I mean, the guy has fucked up almost every business he's had. He's always in the hole. He's cash poor. He's selling his... Right now he's trying to sell to oil billionaires. I'll do whatever you want if you just give me $1 billion when I get in the White House. He's selling policy. He's not representing the people. He's representing whoever can pay him. Which is not how government's supposed to work. So yeah, I mean, he's a threat and he's an idiot. And he flat out said it himself. He should not be in office. Based on that. He said it himself. So, I don't know if you had anything else you wanted to throw in there.
Really only one thought going back on that list that you just rattled off here.
Yeah.
Somebody that rapes 13-year-olds, they call that something else. I'm just going to leave that right there.
Yeah. No kidding. Anyway. Well, that's our show for today. Thanks everybody for watching. Lacey, where can everybody catch you?
As always, you can catch me at mysensewithsense.com. You can find articles that I've written, information about courses and workshops. If you have questions about any of those or topic requests, clips you want to send, or if you want to invite yourself onto the show, you can email us. And Duncan, where should they email us?
You can email us at gossipfinancead@outlook.com. It's down below. Thanks everybody for watching. Please like and subscribe. We're trying to get up there to get monetized. So yeah, please support us. We really appreciate it. We don't do advertising or anything else, so it's all just you guys. Thanks for watching. We'll catch you guys later.
Oh my God.